Hello, everybody. Ian Barkin here. Welcome back to another episode of OneTAKE Live. I've got my iPad next to me that's playing music, so I've just turned that down. I took last week off, so I missed you all. It's great to be here with you. Happy December 1st. I hope you all survived Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and whatever this Tuesday is called. Before we get started, want to wish everyone health and safety. Hope you are sane and safe wherever you are. Please do check out our most recent episode of Psych's Quarterly episode 3 or issue 3, where we discuss not the new normal, because new isn't always better, it's just new, but we talk about the better normal and where enterprises and the world is going and how we can learn from the last many months of our lives to make our enterprises and our civilizations and cultures and communities more resilient and more innovative. So with that, we're going to come back to a topic that we spent a lot of time on with OneTAKE Live, which is so interesting, first of all, so imperative, and I think a foundation stone to anything being a better normal, and that is the topic of customer experience. And with that, I am thrilled to welcome my guest today on the show, Michelle Buretta. Michelle, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So Michelle, let's start with your background. You have a really interesting background. Would love to hear about the work that you did in academics, because you spent a lot of time in school, which is cool, and so I want to hear about that. And then and why? Well, what were you focusing on? What did you want to be when you grew up? And then we'll pivot to your current role and the work that you do today.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it and glad to be here. So in academic, I started out studying more of the hard sciences. I really thought medical school was going to be the route for me because I grew up in a small town, and the only professional people I saw represented were doctors and lawyers and then everyone else, right? And so I grew up in a very blue collar family, and so I thought that the way to kind of get out of Dodge and be successful was that. So my undergrad was in health promotion and wellness, and I also was in the military at the same time. So things took a turn around 2001, if you guys remember some big events that year. And effectively, as I was in the National Guard, we got called up to go active duty. So during my senior year of college, I found myself here in North Carolina at Fort Bragg, so serving as part of Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom.
Gotcha.
So after that, I spent some time here, and I finished undergrad, and I didn't know what I was going to do next. Because I realized very quickly medical school is out of the question for me, but I wanted to help people, right? So, throughout my career, being a customer-centric person, helping service, those have always sort of been the tenets of who I am. And no matter what I do, I find myself sort of gravitating back to that. And so I came to North Carolina, did some graduate school. I became a counselor and worked in academics after that. So mental health counseling, behavioral counseling, did a lot of research in why people behave the way they do, right? And worked as an advisor and a counselor and an instructor for a few years at NC State, and then went back to pursue my PhD. But I like to joke around and say I'm a beauty school dropout, because I didn't finish the PhD, but I got a second master's in sociology. So the net of it is really I love studying sociology, psychology. I love studying the human experience, and I think that in business, that's one of those. It's a soft science, right? It's a social science, and particularly in the industry I work now, I definitely am on the periphery, if you will, of the sciences. But I think it brings this very different element to what the work we do, regardless of the vertical. And regardless of your position in an organization.
Right. Absolutely. I do have to caveat that I don't think I heard the last 2 minutes of what you said, because you said beauty school dropout, and I now have a Grease song running through my head. No graduation day for you. Okay, so but no, so I mean that's fascinating because so much of the study of creating experience, from my experience, it has been really an emphasis on humans, not on applying a widget in a more innovative way, but it's the sociology, the psychology, the anthropology, the study of the human and how they interact with any component of existence, and specifically in the discussion, how they interact with the service or the product or the experience that you've created for them. But so you were passionate about service, you're passionate about people, but did you know that would lead towards customer experience, or there was another end in mind at the time?
I really, so after I left school, I was like, what am I going to do? I happened to get a job as like a technical writer in the mortgage insurance industry, so the financial services vertical. And I was just kind of, right around 30 years old and just kind of bopping around, like, I'm working, am I going to finish school? Am I not? And I really kind of felt like just kind of like lost, like, what am I doing? I had a very clear vision of what I wanted my life to look like. And when that got kind of derailed, I just was, I guess the upside is that I was really open. The long and short of it is that I met somebody really great who became, a wonderful mentor and a manager to me. And, she approached me when I was at Genworth, and she's like, hey, you have this background in research and social sciences. Why don't you come and do some voice of the customer market research stuff in customer experience? And I was like, okay, let's try that. And so, I quickly realized that it was an amazing fit. But then I also had to shift my expectations, because in academia, it's really doing research for research's sake, right? Yeah. But in business, you have to collect information and tell a story and make it worthwhile to the stakeholders you serve, right? And so that lesson I had to learn very quickly, because the only way to sort of add value to customer experience, particularly when we think 10 years ago, it was a nice to have, turning that information, turning those insights around quickly, disseminating those insights to people that can do something, and then making something happen out of that. That was probably my biggest lesson learned, because theoretically, foundationally, I felt like I was there, but business moves a lot quicker than, Yeah.
Well, and then you had to figure out how to speak in their language and make them realize that any sort of interesting research you'd just done or sort of hypotheses you tested mattered in some way for them to actually listen and adopt and act on it. Did they see you as the academic who was trying to find their way into business, or did they appreciate just how powerful and relevant your background was?
I wish they had.
Okay.
Gotcha. But you know how it is in business. I mean, everybody comes in, and it's not like the military where you wear your rank and file and your patches and your sort of war stories on your person, right? And so, I think I had to get to a place where it's like, what's in it for me? From the stakeholder point of view, right? So why would senior leaders and executives care about this work? Why does it matter? And that for me was a really big lesson, because it really didn't matter how much I knew or what I could do. It was like, how do I contribute to the business in a very direct way? And figuring that out, I mean, that was the best advice I got. It's like, Michelle, this isn't a bunch of academics sitting around discussing topics, which I could do. If I could make a life out of that, I would. But
nail that. Yeah, exactly.
I'm good at that. I can talk about any topic, but the truth is creating a narrative and telling a story with data was really powerful, because it has to make sense and be actionable. Otherwise, it's just pie charts, right?
Right. So you'd mentioned Genworth. So you had spent time in financial services companies, and then a short stint at a company that was focused more on childcare, right? And baby supplies.
Biotech, yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. and now you're at Lenovo. Does experience transcend industry, and was your experience and study applicable in the same way to those three very different industries?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about something like market research or voice of the customer research, and creating experiences, that to me that transcends any vertical, right? And so the tenets of what we do, understand, wanting to understand the customer on a real level, asking questions and knowing how to ask questions, knowing how to collect that data and tell a story is just, it's a universal thing, right? That said, for me at least, it's both interesting to change industries, of course, but there's also value in understanding the business, right? And so my background is not in technology, and so there was a learning curve. But I think the upshot of that is you don't have any preconceived notions. So I'm not an engineer, so I don't have an idea how things should be made. So I look at things through the lens of the customer, and so I feel like that gap of not understanding the ins and outs of the industry, or like in the case of Lenovo, we make actual hardware and software. Those details are good to know, and as I have more experience there, I learn those things. But at the same time, I can look at a product or a service from the lens of the customer. So I'm like, hey, if it doesn't make sense to me, there's a good chance it may not make sense to the person who's consuming and using your products. Yeah,
no, that's so well put. This idea of having sort of a child's eye of wonderment and looking at things, it reminds me also, I took an anthropology class in high school, I think, and there was an assignment one time where the teacher tasked us with being aliens who just landed on this planet and explaining, I think, a household as you wander through, and just pretend like you've got no prior experience with the things you see, and now describe them and explain them. And I always think about that as you said, in probably a large extent, not being the engineer who helped design the product makes you so powerfully valuable as you take a fresh look at whatever it is in the context of the research you do.
Well, absolutely. And I think, especially when we think about processes, I noticed in the past, particularly at Genworth, we didn't have a product, right? The product was insurance, so it's intangible. And so a lot of the experiences our customers had were with processes. And so what I found internally, folks always thought in terms of like, well, this is how we do it, and they should know, and it's easier for us. And if we do it that way, it's going to be harder for us. And I, always trying to flip the script and saying, listen, the customer doesn't see any of that. They don't care how the sausage is made. They just want things to be easy. They just want, a human to talk to when they want to talk to a human. They want the website to work. And of course they, customers want everything cheap, right? So, but all joking aside, and I think the other piece of this too is I've worked mostly in B2B environments. And I think the customer, the human being gets lost in that, because we think about B2B as like business to business, but we're not. It's not like a Lenovo sign interacting with an IBM sign. It's just like human people are at the net of this. And so we think about the journey, different interactions, and different humans along that journey are having different, just different interactions with your organization. So to me, a B2B scenario is sometimes even more risky, right, from a brand perspective, because there's so many places along the way where you can get it right or get it seriously wrong. Because the person who is buying, right, on the front end may not be the same person who's calling tech support, and it's usually not, right? And so decision makers, folks, the kind of the technicians, feet on the street, it's different personas, it's different customers, and I think it's the B2B landscape is, to me, much more exciting because of its complexity, and but yet it's still at the heart of it. It's still about human people and their behaviors and their perceptions. Right.
That's an interesting point around. It's effectively there are these handoffs, but there's dovetails between. There might be different people using, experiencing, troubleshooting, and on the enterprise side too, same story. There's different people who designed that product, the people who designed the service processes, as you mentioned, sold the product, marketed it, supported it, and so mean, you nailed one of the magic words that isn't said often enough, which is easy.
Mm-hmm.
Is Do you think customers, B2B or B2C, do you think they're more geared towards wanting some sort of spectacular delight, or do they just want easy? And what wins more often from your experience?
Well, I mean, here's what I'll say about that. I feel like 10 years ago we talked about delighting customers a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so,
Yeah.
if everything else is that parity, how do we delight them? But now I think what's super relevant about what's happening with the pandemic is that ease of use is, to me, the most important thing, right? And so expectation setting, making things easy.
Yeah.
We think about how much we're shopping online for, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and so much of that is about setting the expectation. Hey, things are going to be delayed. Things are on back order. Making websites easy to use. Being able to get a hold of a human when you want to talk to a human person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, the ease is. I guess if I had $100 to spend on my business, I would put like 90 of it into making things easy, making sure things work, because that loyalty piece, especially in a world where you can go buy a vacuum on 5 different websites. And I'm speaking from experience. I just bought a Shark this weekend. So you have multiple windows open and you're like, all right, if this is too hard to buy here, then, how can I get it somewhere else? And I don't think and price matters, but if you're clicking and clacking and having to reset your password a bunch of times, or you can't get a hold of someone, at the end of the day, I think people by and large will pay a little bit more just to know that they're gonna get their things by Christmas, or that if there's an issue, someone's going to help them.
Absolutely. Oh, I ease wins over everything else for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even price shop anymore, just because they're the few sort of traditional sites that we all go to, probably too often these days, that are delivering packages to my door almost hourly.
Yeah.
But it's so easy that why would I go through the trouble of hunting or dealing with I've got a lot of examples of that where I've knowingly chosen probably a more expensive but easier route, just because it's better for me. And that's
your sanity.
Yeah, well, it's better for your sanity, and you, as you said, you just my goal as a customer isn't to be a full-time dedicated customer. I just kind of want enough information. I want to get in. I want to get that service or product. I want it to work. I want it to show up on time, as you said, especially if it's a holiday and I need it by a certain date.
Well, right. And I think the other piece of this ease, it's not just about being easy once, but it's about that consistent experience, right? And so where brands like Chewy and Amazon win is that people know what to expect because they're consistent, they're predictable. People want things that are predictable and routinized, right? And so when we think about not just ease, but a consistent experience over time, I know what to expect. Those kinds of things, I mean, are a lot of times we don't articulate it, but we just know we have brand affinity. But those to me are tenets of the feelings that we experience as consumers. And just to kind of bring it full circle too, is that in a B2B experience, we're consumers every day of our lives, after 5, before 9 a.m., all those things. And we can't help but think that the experiences that we have as consumers in a B2C environment don't carry over into B2B, right? So we see that at Lenovo. We see that people expect things quickly because of their experiences that they have, shopping online, And so, those B2C things transcend beyond just your own personal life. And so as customer experience professionals, I think we have to take a more holistic view. And going back to your question about, different industries and different verticals, at the end of it, the experience is the same. So when I think about our customers at Lenovo, whether they're buying a server or they're buying pencils from Staples, they really want that same experience. They want something easy, consistent, and helpful when they need it.
Absolutely. No, I don't think that there's any sort of compartmentalization that consumers do any longer. You're absolutely right that the experience I got from a completely different service or product, I just expected that sort of that sort of easiness or joy or lack of pain to appear in other walks of my life that I'm purchasing things. And I mean, you see that with even technology, just consumer technology, of just you want your workplace email or phone systems to work the same way that your personal ones do, and it's always, enterprises have always struggled to emulate that. And with products and services, it's just that much harder. And as you said, if you've got Chewy out there or Amazon or others that just nail it, the bar has been raised for everyone in every industry.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so so you mentioned Genworth, you've mentioned Lenovo quite a few times now. Your title and your role. Let's dig into that for a second, because there's a few elements I think are so interesting. So share it with me, because I don't want to get it wrong, but it's CX Analytics, it's a data center group, it's worldwide. What's the what is your full remit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring that out now.
Okay.
But all kidding aside, I came to Lenovo almost 2 years ago, and I was hired on to lead the customer experience, like the voice of customer group, the CX Analytics improvements team. And so my team was located all over the world, and we're a global organization, right? And so really the task of the team was to collect customer insights from all 5 geographies and make sense of it, both at the, slice and dice based on the type of customer, products, area of the world. And so it was a big task and incredibly interesting, right? Because it's not just what customers are doing, it's the cultural context too, that I learned very quickly that, what does a 9 out of 10 mean here in the US versus Europe versus Asia. And so those sorts of things too, the way we perceive our experiences are different. What we value is similar, but also nuanced within the culture and the expectation setting. And so I did that role. I took over I'm leading the customer experience team now. So that just happened a couple months ago. And truth be told, I didn't update LinkedIn because that's it's one of those pain points for me. I always feel so braggadocious on LinkedIn. Like I just want to put a picture of my dog and, what I'd like to do on weekends, really, if it was up to me. But
so braggadocious is an awesome word. Dogs on LinkedIn is a good idea. Chewy should have like a dog LinkedIn where the dogs share their accomplishments. I would spend a lot of my time on my dog's LinkedIn profile if he had.
I would too. I would too. It really, they're the most interesting parts of my life, I have to say. But
without a doubt. So quick question. So with a background in sociology and education and an understanding, a passion for people, right? As you mentioned before, you need to kind of get to what a person is looking for, but sometimes they may not even know it themselves. And then you add the additional complexity of cultures are very different. And so do you have to ask just the fundamental questions differently? And I have seen in my career, been lucky enough to interact with lots of different cultures. And you're right that you could give the exact same experience and they could be equally as happy with the experience. And one group gives it a 6 and the other group gives it a 12 out of 10. And you're just like, what's happening here? But it's just culturally people exude differently. They score differently. So I guess from a construct perspective, how do you go about soliciting insight and voice of customer across so many different cultures?
I guess like not just here, but just in general, right? Is start with the end in mind. What are you trying to understand, and what are you going to do with it, right? What are you going to do with the data once you have it? And so sometimes, what I've noticed in the past, a lot of folks will come to you and say, "Oh, I want to know all these things about X, Y, Z," and I'm like, "All right, well, what are you going to do with this information once you have it? And what's the most important nuggets, right? Because if we're going to ask our customers for their opinion, we got to make sure we're doing something with it, right? And let them know what we're doing with it, and to closing the loop to some extent, right? And so I always think about, let's start with the end in mind, because culture matters. And, my favorite research in the world is doing ethnographic research and, having conversations with people. But unfortunately, right now I can't fly all over the world and talk to people, and be like an Anthony Bourdain situation, which is, like my North Star. But the truth is figuring out what the business needs. And sometimes that takes multiple conversations, because my job is to understand that stakeholders can't always articulate what they really need. Yes. But so it takes a little bit of probing and teasing out. So to me, people who are good at research, people who are good at voice of customer research, do that front end piece well. Because it's not just about like, a lot of folks are like, well, I'm really good at analyzing data. And I'm like, well, if the questions if the questions aren't answering what you really need answered, then you got it's a whole package, right?
Right. Well, and then I think you can, as you said, you can parse the data and come up with incomplete answers if you didn't get the right data. Depending on the product and service, I guess is a little, no, maybe that's not fair. Whether it's product or service, as you said, being in front of people, interacting with the environment in which they use said product or service, from my experience, has been hugely valuable. And as you also said, we're not traveling right now. So is that a constraint? Is it hard to discern how people really feel over video chats and survey mechanisms? Has that constrained the work you do?
It's not ideal, but I think the upshot is having a team. I have folks on my team that are located within those geographies. So, for example, I have someone on my team who's located in China, right, in Shenzhen, and so she's able to not only speak the language, which oftentimes is a challenge, to make sure you're getting the message right on both ends, right? But also understanding the culture and being able to meet with different stakeholders face to face. And in an ideal situation too, she'd be out there with customers, as I'd be out with customers here in the States and things like that, if in regular times, if you will, because I think that's the other piece that I learned earlier on, is just going and meeting the customer, spending time with sales and account managers and things like that, just seeing the customer in their environment, right? A very Jane Goodall kind of experience, right? To just see what does it look like when you set up your server? What does it look like? What does your business look like? And those things are different across the business types, different segments, culturally, size of business, et cetera. So being able to really just witness, just not even asking questions, kind of sitting back and saying, all right, what does it look like when you make dinner?
No, the Jane Goodall example is a perfect one. Just sort of sitting there amongst the
all just primates, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Just studying the primates and how they interact with things is what you need to do. And if you asked us to articulate in our own words, sometimes we just can't, because it's not something we've thought that hard about, and so we don't have that vocabulary. I imagine that's a challenge in any sort of voice of customer. Is maybe B2B customers are more experienced talking about the relationship and the product or service that they're getting, but consumers, I'm not called. I mean, perhaps I am. I don't pick up those phone calls. That number is not identified, so I don't answer it, and therefore I'm not queried too often on how I'm experiencing different products in my life. So that's interesting. Okay, so I want to pivot for the last several minutes together, because your academic backgrounds and your thesis are tremendously interesting to me, and I think always, but as we talked about before the show, sort of now more so perhaps than ever, it's a relevant area for enterprises to be thinking about. So with that cryptic lead in, I did a great job of leaving everyone confused. So with that lead in, please share what your thesis was about.
Yeah, so that was a lot of buildup, right? So it wasn't about UFOs or anything.
I don't have a drum here. I would give you a drum roll if I had one.
No, I'm picking on you, but so when I was a doctoral student, I studied work and family, sort of the intersectionality between work and family, and that's why this time right now is so incredibly interesting to me, and the dynamics unfolding and how the world is changing, and we're just kind of like, whoa, we got to catch up, right? And for so long, folks like myself were beating this drum like things have to change. Industry is going to miss out on their top talent because of location restrictions, because of inflexibility, because preconceived notions of what it means to work and where and what times. And so, in this very Dolly Parton punch card 9 to 5, we missed out on so much, right? And so my thesis is really about why are there so few women in the executive suite, right? And so I know it's a little tongue in cheek, but but really it's about who has access, who has, and the two other pieces that are really huge are having a mentor and a sponsor, and the difference between those, right? Okay. Someone to sponsor your work and to say, hey, Michelle, you do great work, and look at this work that you're doing, right? And giving you full credit and putting you in those situations, right? And then also having a mentorship relationship that is just about like, hey, I'm feeling this kind of way, or, let's talk about your career. Let's just talk about anything, right? Struggles, whatever. And so mentorship, sponsorship, accessibility, right? If you don't have a seat at the table, you're gonna hit the ceiling, right? And I know the glass ceiling is kind of it's a term that's been used for a long time, but sometimes I don't think that folks really understand the feeling of, okay, that next level requires what? It requires access. It requires, think about things, small things, like going out for drinks or going golfing after work. Remember when we went into offices and we did those things as humans? So
I don't know how to play golf, but I do remember the drinks.
So I mean, it's small things like that, right? And so he was being invited to those things, and particularly when we think in context of gender, for a myriad of reasons. That if you and I went out for drinks after work, it looks very different than if it was 2 females or 2 males, right? And so, but those informal conversations, those informal relationships build trust. And when we look at people in the highest levels of the organization, it really isn't about like, I know the most about customer experience, or, I have 20 degrees or whatever. It's pedigree is a small part of that. Hard work's a small part of that. It's about the relationships and building trust, because at the highest levels of the organization, you're asked to make decisions and have responsibilities that are can make or break a business. So particularly if you think about a business that's a small to medium sized business, you have to be able to trust that person. And that is where those informal relationships is where that's built. And that's something we don't talk about. We joke about, meeting your boss at the country club on a Saturday, but the truth is those things matter. And I think they're underplayed oftentimes. And so this is where I think the gender piece gets very divisive, because we think it's like, well, it's because I'm a girl. Well, no, not necessarily. It doesn't mean I'm less talented or less capable or anything like that. What it becomes is it's just like, who are in these circles, who's developing those relationships outside of, not just outside of work, but just throughout the fabric of ourselves, because work is work. But it's when we think about our struggles at work, when we think about the things that keep us up at night, when we think about the things that make us most excited, it's generally the people, it's the organizational culture and the people we work with, right? I mean, you think about your favorite job. I don't think about, I did this research study at Genworth. I think about the humans and the culture and the folks I miss. And, that was probably more than you needed to hear, but I guess my point is it all comes down to people again, and relationships, and that you sound, it might be a little verbose, but it really is about all of that. And, how we feel about one another holds a ton of weight
Absolutely.
in the end.
No, and I think that's what's interesting. First of all, thank you, and massively relevant and so important, and so related, as you said, to what your passion was of understanding people, understanding sociology, understanding family dynamics, and a company's a family, a team's a family, and there are as many, if not probably more complex dynamics in a work environment that need to be paid attention to. And that fits into discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It also fits into discussions around product experience and service experience, as well as fitting into the makeup of executive suites and leadership teams, which is on the top of a lot of agendas these days. And what's so sort of tragic, I think, about 2020 too, is a lot of the research would suggest that we're backsliding just because of some of the family dynamics at home.
Absolutely.
And all the demands that have been put on those different traditional gender roles that may either help highlight those challenges or differences, or it may just set us back.
I think just, I think you're right. And I hope that as, when we look back, I hope that we look at the dynamics of this situation, not just from a parent, but from a caretaker, right? We think about ourselves, folks my age and a little bit older, the sandwich generation, right? So we're caring for folks younger than us, and then our families, our parents that are aging and things like that. So it's an enormous amount of responsibility in uncharted territory, right? And I think back to the days of the military, and I think what makes it really difficult about this situation is, at least I would tell people, at least when I was in the Army, you're like, okay, we're going home on this date, or you can look forward to some reprieve and some relief. I think there was an expectation in the beginning that this was going to be a short stint of sacrifice and of behavior modification, and now it just feels like it's going on in perpetuity. And so we talk about the new normal, but I feel like we're still sort of in purgatory. We're like, what's happening? What is it really going to look like? I mean, our mask's going to be a permanent fashion feature forever. What is this world going to look like? When are we going to go to, when am I going to go back and see Dave Matthews live with like 10,000 other people? That's my main priority, So
I see. That is important. That is a great way of summarizing. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and you're right. I mean, just in the social dynamics and contracts between humans and how we interact, especially in crowded places, and that also has a cultural element to it too, which is it's different. It's different in the States, from every state to state and community to community. And who knows when we'll get back to normal. You've listed a lot of things that I golf wasn't one of them, but the going out, the concerts, the traveling in airplanes, the visiting teams and customers again. This has been bittersweet. This is a bittersweet discussion of missing all of these normalcies that may return one day. Hopefully will return one day, soon-ish. But a more question on your thesis and the topic around if there were more of a representation in executive leadership and in leadership in general, do you think enterprises would have a different sort of emphasis set on things like, so to tie two of your threads together on experience? Would enterprises listen more? Would they be more sort of empathetic to consumers of products and services because of perhaps just different approaches or different emphasis that diversity brings?
I think so, but again, it's being willing to listen, right? And so you can, even if you have a seat at the table, you can bring all this good information and say, listen, here's what customers want, here's what we should do. It's being willing to listen and being willing to flex and get rid of your own preconceived notions. Change is hard, and nobody wants to hear that their baby's ugly, right? And so that's always been a challenge in the CX world, particularly in voice of customer, right? Like customers love us, and I was like, they like you, so they're not to you. But but in all seriousness, when you think about the household as a company, right? And so by and large, women manage the household, right? There's this emotional and there's really like this emotional management that happens, right? Where, they're organizing, hey, kids are going to school online or in person, doctor's appointments, food, activities, their own work, their own well-being. And And so there is a ton of management that goes on. And so when you think about the products, services, all the things that we interact with in our daily household now, that is even more, right? If our home is now the place where we educate our kids, the place where we work, the place where we try to relax and unplug, and entertain ourselves, the home has taken on a really different connotation. And when we think about that in terms of serving our customers, listening to the managers of the household and having those folks in the organization who are willing to listen and look at things from the perspective of the decision makers, the perspective of our customers in a real way, I think would really improve. I think that's where we miss out sometimes is, sometimes you're like, who designed this? Like, who did, who was thinking, like, was there any user experience in this process whatsoever? And so to your point, I think the more relevant voices you have, and I don't mean to say that, men aren't participating or don't manage and stuff like that. That's not, that's definitely not what I mean. And I think everybody's had to pick up more and more slack in this environment. And I think it's also good too for, sometimes it's good for both parties, both partners to see what each other does in their jobs, right? Because oftentimes we don't have insight into, like, I thought my husband just hangs out at the water cooler and goes out to lunch. I didn't know what he did all day, and so it's good to see him in a work environment. It's how do we navigate and collaborate through these different weird things that are happening, like all that kind of stuff. So
I asked my kids what I do all day, and they said, "You just talk loudly," and that's pretty accurate. I think they've nailed it. I think I've bestowed upon my children knowledge of what their father does every day at work. But that empathy, that visibility is incredibly important in any walk of life, and especially if you're attuned to. And watch how humans interact with all of those walks of life, you're probably you're better positioned to make experiences easy and make them more delightful, and maybe they will like you, perhaps love you, if you do it right.
Absolutely.
So that's outstanding. Well, Michelle, let's wrap up there. Thank you so much for your references to Anthony Bourdain, Jane Goodall, Grease.
Gotta keep it real,
and Dave Matthews. I mean, this was an outstanding discussion of references, and I will have the Grease soundtrack in my head for the rest of the day. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And with that, I just want to wish all of our listeners a happy December. Good luck out there as the so-called purgatory continues. But stay safe, and please follow the show, follow Michelle, follow me on LinkedIn if you want to see more of what we are all doing and following our own passions. And with that, thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.